So let's not go overboard in setting and enforcing tough emission standards from man-made sources. Don't you love what Reagan used to say? That was a smart one too. And of course, I liked he could make fun of himself, and people were always making fun he was too old, and that was problematic. And so he said, I lay down the law to everyone from now on about anything that happens. No matter what time it is, you wake me up even if it's in the middle of a cabinet meeting. He could make fun of himself. Well, I was trying to take that same slant on things when Romney was going to be our nominee, and that was in the summer of 2012, and there were a few of us conservatives that had a press conference in Washington, and one of the reporters said, you guys don't seem all that thrilled about Mitt Romney being your nominee. And one of the other guys said, well, we're all going to support whoever the Republican nominee is. And another reporter said, yeah, but you don't seem excited about Mitt Romney as your nominee. And I said, look, it doesn't matter if you're liberal, moderate, conservative. It doesn't matter what issue is most important to you. You ought to love Mitt Romney because at one time or another, he's been on your side. Then I started taking incoming shots from the you need to stop. I said, well, you know, people loved it when humor was used about Reagan. No, that was when Reagan told jokes on himself. You don't need to be saying that kind of. Well, I mean, what did you say? When people ask you, hey, I saw the video, Romney versus Romney. He'd been on both sides of every issue. Life, choice, you know. And I understand people changing positions, and that's why we try to persuade people. But when it's on most every important issue, it's really a problem when that's your nominee. He probably is the nicest, most philanthropic, best businessman we've had run. I know he is in my lifetime. But he was the only guy that couldn't talk about the #1 issue in America in 2012, and that was Obamacare. And it is still a damnable government overreach. I have to be careful because it's apparently being filmed. But anyway, it was all about government power from the beginning. It was never about helping anybody with their health care. And if you want to look at, the first piece of evidence of that, it cut Medicare by over $700 billion, $716 billion over 10 years. And if you're going to do that to the nation's seniors, then you really don't care that much about rank and file Americans' health care. And if they'll do it to seniors right off the bat, then you will be next. Now, we've got some Republicans in Congress who have said, look, we don't need to spend any more time trying to take out Obamacare because it's going to die of its own accord. Socialism dies of its own accord. It always dies. Margaret Thatcher said eventually you run out of other people's money. And I was an exchange student for a summer to the Soviet Union back in the 70s when it was the Soviet Union. And I saw they can't sustain this. You can't have babushkas out sweeping a 10-foot section of the sidewalk over and over again all day and actually make it as a nation. And it brought them down, thanks to Ronald Reagan pushing them. Otherwise, it might have been another 30, 40, 50 years before it happened. But because of Reagan, it happened more quickly. But socialized medicine has never gone broke. Why? Because you get put in lines. And when they're short on money and they get shorter on money, then you get in a longer and longer line to get what you need. And whether you want to call it a death panel or the iPad, whatever you want to call it, it's fine by me. But the fact is, there is a group that says, you're a little too old to get a pacemaker. You're a little too old to have hip surgery. You're a little too old to have a knee replacement. And the government should not be telling anybody those things. That's not their business. So liberals took over education, they took over media, they took over movies and television, but especially in education, they took over much of the higher education that taught the teachers. And we wonder why we're in the shape we are in, where people think socialism can work now. I mean, I have really caring kids ask me. Now, I know socialism is bad, basically, but can you explain why? They've never been taught. They don't understand that you can't have socialism in this world without some form of dictatorial government. It doesn't work. And actually, I did a college paper on this, but Khrushchev, back in the early 60s, since if you study communism, actually, the goal is supposed to eventually have from all those according to their abilities to all those according to their needs, and that you will eventually reach a point where everyone is doing that. And therefore, at that point, you need no more government. And so Khrushchev thought, well, you know, that's the end goal, no more government. And he set up a commission to provide the plan of how to move through and get to that final stage. And it didn't take too long before they all said, we can't ever get to that final stage, and he dismissed the commission, and they never came out with their results. That's where it goes. And the best description of socialism happened that summer in the Soviet Union out at a collective farm about 30 miles outside of Kiev. And you know, I've worked on farms and ranches, and especially in summertime like this was, we would start early. I mean, sun up, you'd be out maybe a little before sun up, because you want to be done by 3:30 before it just, the heat got overwhelming. And so it's mid-morning, 10:30, something like that. We were in, all these guys were sitting in the shade in the middle of the little village there. And I used my best Russian, and I asked, and I couldn't tell what was cultivated and what wasn't. It all just was brown and looked sad. But I said to these farmers, I said, when do you work in the field? Because it's obvious they hadn't been out there that morning. And they all laughed, and I thought, well, I must not have gotten the translation right. And one of them said, I make the same number of rubles if I'm here in the shade or if I'm out there in the sun. So I'm here in the shade. Bingo. If you're going to pay people to be in the shade or in the sun, guess where they're going to end up? And the very best in this room, if you work long enough, will eventually say, I'm not killing myself or everybody else in the room. I'm going to sit back and not work either until the rest of them come join me working. I mean, no matter how good you are, at some point, you see the system slipping away. And friends, that's exactly what's happening in America today. Exactly. And that's why we got to fix it, and that's why we got to educate the young people of what's going on. Now, when it comes to immigration, I heard our dear friend Megyn Kelly asking my dear friend Ted Cruz, you know, about, gee, you sound like you're trying to dodge the question. And were she to ask me that question, I would give basically the same thing, except I would add what I have many times when people have tried to demand the answer, well, what will you do with everybody here? Well, first of all, we've been talking about 11 million people here as millions and millions more people keep coming in. Do you really think it's 11 million?
No.
Seriously?
No.
Okay, so that's a whole other issue. But the bottom line is, I've spent too much time, all hours of the day and night, down on our border in South Texas. I've been on the border in New Mexico and Arizona as well. But they make very clear, the Border Patrol, not when their supervisor's around, but you know, when it's just there, 2 a.m. and they're very candid. Look, every time one of you guys in Congress, one of you guys in the administration start talking about amnesty, legal status, who's going to get to stay, All of those things, anything related to that, when you guys in Washington start talking about that, we see another flood across the border. Would you quit talking about it? Because when you know that there are girls dying, there are men and women dying, there are girls that are being raped, there are girls being sold into sex slavery. Every time we have a wave, some don't make it, some get sold into sex slavery. For heaven's sake, let's secure the border so no more children are forced into harm's way. Secure the border, and then we'll talk about what we do with those here. Let's secure the border, then we'll look at it. And that's the answer. And nobody should be pulled away from that. So I don't care who's doing the questioning. We've got to stop this. It's insanity. And we were having a hearing in our Judiciary Committee, has jurisdiction over immigration, and one of the witnesses talked about, how we need to be more open and this kind of thing. And I said, well, why are all these people coming in from poor countries? He said, well, they're coming for jobs. I said, no, that's what's here. But why aren't they staying and getting those jobs where they live? Because they don't have those jobs there. And because there's too much violence there. And why do they have violence and no jobs where they are? Well, it's because of all the corruption. Yes, and why do you have corruption? Well, it's when you don't have the rule of law, it's not applied fairly across the board. Bingo. Yes. So the bottom line is, we have some people coming here illegally and saying, now that we're here illegally, we want you to disregard the law. We had to leave a country where they disregard the law and you get to bribe and it's a corrupt system. And now we're coming here, we don't want to be treated like everybody else that has to follow the law. We want special treatment, which would make you like the country we had to flee because you don't enforce the rule of law across the board. It's time to stop that craziness. And, this administration still has no ISIS plan. They have no ISIS strategy. Now, you cannot meet a nicer person than President George W. Bush. He, like his father, is just as gracious and nice, unless you're a real jerk to him, and he can see that and raise you one. But anyway, but generally, they're just not nicer folks. But no matter who you are in Washington, you get advice from somewhere. And hopefully if you're a representative or senator, you're getting advice from your constituents. But when you're president, you're surrounded by people that you listen to, and that's why it's so critical you listen to good advice. If you look objectively at what happened in Afghanistan in 2001, that took us about a month to figure out. Osama bin Laden was behind it, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the mastermind, but the training, the real effort that brought it about happened from the Taliban in Afghanistan, so that's the first thing we take out the Taliban. We were serious about it. We sent just under 300, not 300,000, but 300 special ops and intelligence guys to Afghanistan. They were embedded with the Northern Alliance. That's a bunch of tribal folks, and no, these aren't tribes that live in teepees or huts or something. These are regular folks, but they're different tribal groups in different areas there in northern Afghanistan, and nearly all of them are Muslim. But they don't want a radical Islamist ruling their country. They didn't want the Taliban. And the Taliban knew that. And so they were, they may be crazy, but they're not stupid. Y'all know that joke. I mean, my mother told me that. My late mom told me that back when I was probably in elementary school to explain the difference between crazy and stupid. guy driving through the insane asylum grounds back when they had an insane asylum, and one of his wheel, tire, everything just fell off the axle. And he got out, and he's looking at it, and he can't figure out what he's going to do. He doesn't see the lug nuts anywhere. And there was one of the patients there sitting on a bench and says, "Hey buddy, all you got to do is take one lug nut off your other 3 wheels, and then that'll hold that one on long enough to get to a station where they can fix it." He said, "That's brilliant." And he said, "Look, I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid." So there is a difference. These same guys that are crazy enough to go kill themselves on airplanes in the hopes that they'll kill thousands of people, they weren't so stupid that they couldn't look at blueprints of the World Trade Centers and had hopes that the load might be enough to bring those buildings down. They didn't know for sure if it would, but they thought it might. They looked at the blueprints. These guys are not stupid. And the Taliban is not stupid. So these tribal groups, we gave them heavy weapons, we gave them aerial support above, but only our special ops guys could call it down. Specific instances of, like General Dustin, and this was an effort getting everybody to agree to be under one Afghan commander, but they finally agreed all to be under General Dustin, probably the best horseback warrior in Afghanistan or Asia altogether. But anyway, Dustin says, "See that hump on that ridge over there across the way? That is a bunker, and it's probably got hundreds of Taliban." So our guy grabs a satellite phone, dials up using the codes to the plane that's up at 40,000 feet, says, "I need you to release a bomb." They release a bomb. He directs it right into the bunker, and I know some people think it's overly cruel, but those who were able to crawl out alive were killed by the Northern Alliance. And by February of 2002, the Taliban was defeated. People have forgotten. But for much of the Iraq war, people would say, now, Afghanistan, that's the way you fight a war, because we had won. And then what we do, well, the advice was, well, we can't just leave the country now to these moderate Muslims. We need to show them the kind of government they should have. And I've talked to people over there about, and I was in a meeting in Germany with one of the guys that was in Condoleezza Rice's inner circle. I talked to another, said, yeah, we were giving her advice. Some said, let's give them a federalist kind of government where all the powers in the states or regions, because they're a tribal country. Well, that makes sense. Oh, but the winning strategy was, no, let's give them a really strong central government, stovepipe, just really strong central government, because if we give them a federalist country, well, we'll have to deal with all those different state leaders, and that'll be, let's have just one. And they set it up in such a way that it was ripe for corruption. And the Karzai family, Karzai said, well, I didn't, well, maybe my family. But anyway, somebody was making a lot of corrupt money off of Americans. We won the war by just helping the people, the enemy of our enemy, defeat the Taliban. And then we didn't do nearly as well on the occupation. So the solution, and that wouldn't necessarily work everywhere in the world, but it will work on ISIS. The people that never threw down their weapons, who I've met with numerous times. I've been in the command center there in northern Iraq, the Kurdish command center, and I've seen what they see. These are guys that are willing to fight to the death to protect what they believe is their home. Well, the Shia and the Sunni don't agree on a lot, but they agree they don't want to have the Kurds with a lot of weapons. So this administration sends weapons to the Kurds through Baghdad. And for some reason, they don't make their way up to the northern part of the country where the fighting is going on. And the other place we're sending massive amounts of weapons has been to the, and I'm quoting, moderate, vetted Syrian rebels. And you can go online and find quotes from their leaders that say we have more in common with ISIS than we do with the United States. And amazingly, for all these couple, 2 or 3 years we've been sending them weapons, they keep reporting back, we need more weapons because ISIS came in and took everything we had. And that happened enough that between December and April, I think of last year, the administration suspended shipment because everything we get keeps ending up in ISIS hands. And so they suspended for a while, but I can see you're worried. Don't worry, they're shipping them all those arms back again to the modded veteran Syrian rebels that keep getting into the hands of ISIS. And I know there's all this hand-wringing, well, should we, what are we going to do to stop young people over here in North America from going over and joining ISIS? Well, if you kick their rear ends, you don't find many people saying, I want to go over there and get my rear end kicked. That looks like fun. No, they don't go running over there. But when you let them look like they're succeeding, then people want to join a winner. Patton said something about that. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. When I was in the Corps Cadets at Texas A&M as a freshman, seniors made me memorize Patton's speech, and I had to be ready to jump up on the chair and use the Patton voice and deliver that speech. Now, I don't want to get any messages. We are holding our positions. We're not holding on to anything. We'll let the Hun do that. Anyway, but Patton had some good points, didn't he? If you're going to war with somebody, don't fool around. You fight them, win, and come home. That's what you do. And I'm sick of people saying, well, the lesson here from we should have learned in Vietnam and we should have learned these other places is some wars you can't win. That's not the lesson of Vietnam. It's not the lesson of anywhere when it comes to America. The lesson of Vietnam is that if you're not going to give our guys what they need to win and give them authority to win and let them win, then don't send them in the first place. Let me just touch on this real quick, because it is of ultimate importance, and I'll take questions, but I got to touch on Iran before I take questions. This is serious. This puts the whole world in jeopardy, this Iranian deal.
Yes, it does.
And, you know, I've made my endorsement for president. I'm thrilled with a number of the people that are running as Republicans for president. But all but one of the senators voted for the Corker bill. I could see this, you don't do this, this isn't in fairness to those who voted for it. They were told by the administration repeatedly, this is not a treaty, this is an agreement, and actually, on March 11, 2015, John Kerry, in describing the administration's nuclear negotiations with Iran, clearly stated it was, quote, not negotiating a legally binding plan, unquote, with Iran, and therefore it didn't have to be submitted to Congress. He's right. If it's not legally binding, it's not a treaty, you don't have to come to Congress. They were describing an agreement that didn't have to come to Congress. Some of us could see where this was going.
Yeah.
But now, as of this summer, we have been given the Iran deal. We know it's a treaty. So I'm going to file a bill as soon as we get back after Labor Day, a House resolution, and I'm hoping to have somebody in the Senate file it there. And right now, as we speak, there are senators saying, maybe let's try to turn this around and maybe say, let's amend the Corker bill and say we need to have a majority vote for it instead of saying 2/3 to vote it down. That's not the answer either. What is the answer? The answer is the United States Constitution. It says if you've got a treaty, it will not bind the United States unless you get 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to vote for it and ratify it. That's what we've got to get back to. That's what this resolution says. You know, some wonderful senators took Kerry and Obama at their word that this would not be legally binding, that it would only have to do with nuclear weapons. And now we've seen the deal. It applies to ICBMs, it applies to nukes, it applies to weapons purchases of all kinds, it applies to the sanctions. It's a treaty.
Yeah.
So I hope you will encourage everybody you know, to encourage everybody they know to understand it's a treaty. It requires 2/3 of the Senate voting for it to ratify it. And as far as the Corker bill, you cannot amend the U.S. Constitution with a piece of legislation. So let's have the Constitution apply what it says you have to do. Otherwise, we're going to lose. And people are already saying that today. And I'll finish with a quote from one of the greatest NFL coaches of all time, Marv Levy. He was coach of the Buffalo Bills. They lost 5 Super Bowls. They had great teams, but they lost 5 Super Bowls. And his quote verbatim was this: "When you lose, you're in a no-win situation."